Hey everybody! Yesterday I shot a video about my 20-gallon angelfish tank, and I talked about how I got in there and I gave it a really good vigorous gravel vacuum as part of a cyanobacteria treatment, and I wound up disrupting the nitrogen cycle, or at least I believe that the vigorous gravel vacuum is what disrupted the nitrogen cycle. I'll go ahead and put a card up there. It's probably across my forehead right now. You can go ahead and check that video out if you haven't seen it already. I'm not going to get into talking about that at the moment. But what I did get in the responses below was probably an equal number of people telling me that I needed to gravel vac all the time, very vigorously, and if I didn't stay on top of it, I would have these types of issues. And then, of course, I also had the people telling me that I should never gravel vac, and that if I ever touch the gravel at all, and of course I'm exaggerating a little bit here, but you get the picture. I got both sides of the coin. I got told to leave the gravel alone, and I got told I need to pay way more attention to it in order to keep it healthy. So which one of those arguments is the correct one? And of course the answer is the answer I usually find to be the correct one, and that is, well, it depends. You know, it depends on how much substrate you have, it depends on how deep the substrate is, it depends on what kind of substrate you have, it depends on whether or not you've got a planted tank or not. In my case, the substrate that is in that tank and in a lot of my tanks, not the tank you see behind me here, this is just standard aquarium gravel. I bought it at Walmart for, I think it's $12 for a 25-pound bag of it or something. And we'll get into that discussion, the trade-offs between different types of substrates, because that makes a big difference in how your tank functions. Now, the substrate I use in that tank and the substrate in a lot of my tanks, that really dark black substrate you see in most of my tanks, is Eco Complete by Carib Sea. It's really good stuff. It's not cheap, but it's also not outrageously expensive. I've seen a lot of stuff out there more expensive than it, but it's good stuff. It's a bimodal substrate in that it's got sort of sand and more of a rough gravelly aggregate, and it's designed so the sand settles to the bottom, the aggregate goes towards the top, and it gives me these sort of two layers of substrate. So just by knowing that alone, that ought to tell you right there that you really shouldn't be in there gravel vacuuming it. If it's designed to separate into two separate layers, gravel vacuuming, it's going to disrupt that. And so you could just sort of go by that level of simplicity to say, all right, in that situation, we probably shouldn't do too much gravel vacuuming. Now, if you've got a sand substrate, well, you don't really need to vac that because nothing really penetrates and gets down into the sand. It just sort of swirls around on top of it. You also get into the depths of the sand. If you've got 4 or 5 inches of sand, you're going to have a denitrification process going on in there. Now, you may get gas pockets that develop, and you may have to stir the sand to disrupt those gas pockets occasionally, but that's a little different than what I'm talking about as far as gravel vacuuming. So, you know, there's just no one set way to have a tank that you can say this is, you should always do it this way, you should always do it that way. It really does depend on how you've got your tank set up and what's in it. If you've got a very, very basic, standard, what I think of as sort of a beginner tank, the kind of tank you see pictured on the boxes of aquarium equipment. It's got 1 angelfish, some plastic plants, and 1 inch of gravel across the bottom of the tank. If it's this kind of gravel, or if it's the colored gravel, we affectionately call clown barf all the time. If it's that kind of stuff, it's this kind of, you know, just pea gravel, and you've only got 1 inch of it in there, I would gravel vac as often as I could. That scenario is not a scenario that's set up to where the substrate is really designed to do anything other than give you the appearance of having a bottom to your tank other than bare glass. It's not designed to be a good substrate for plants to root into. It's not designed to be a substrate that's supposed to be sort of part of your nitrogen cycle or anything. That's simply there for a visual appeal of having a bottom to your tank. You've got a substrate in there. So you're going to want to get all that loam and, you know, all that stuff that's going to build up, you know, and fall down between all those cracks. You want to get that out of there as frequently as possible. I found out myself the hard way that you get bacterial loads building up in there. It's not just, you know, the waste that breaks down into the nitrogen cycle, and it's not just the ammonia that's being produced. It's, you know, it's kind of filthy, dirty stuff down there, and bacteria is being produced. So you really want to get that out of there as much as possible. If you've got a tank that's planted, it's got a deeper substrate, that's designed not to be disturbed. And so that's a situation where you don't want to gravel vac it very often. And getting back to my tank, that substrate is a little bit of both, honestly. It's got the sand that settles at the bottom, and that serves as not only a nice good foundation for roots to get into, but it also serves as sort of a denitrifying base layer. It's dense enough, and it's that sand, it compacts enough that it really, as long as you don't bother it, it will provide a little bit of denitrification. If you gravel vac gently, then you really do sort of just pick up that top, and it sort of sorts out the debris and all the loose detritus and stuff, and the gravel sips back down, and you don't really disturb that base layer. That is how that material, that substrate, is designed to be gravel vac. For me, what I did was something extraordinary in the sense that I was deliberately trying to grind up a bunch of cyanobacteria, and really my goal was to get in there and really disturb all of that cyanobacteria and work all of the water that had the ChemiClean treatment. I wanted that all scrunched down and worked through there. So what I did was something a little bit differently. Normally, when I gravel vac my tanks, and I do gravel vac those tanks, I do it the way I just described. I do it gently. I allow that surface area to get lifted up. It pulls all that stuff out, and it doesn't disturb my base layer. If I'm gravel vacuuming this tank, and I do occasionally what little I can get to this little edge here and there, and I get in there. That's when I really scrunch that gravel vac down in there. I try to get to the bottom. You see all that nastiness come up out of the bottom. This is a different type of substrate. It's a different setup in a tank, and it's just, it's a completely different scenario than what's in some of my other tanks. And so there is no one remedy of how often I should always gravel vac or I should never gravel vac or whatever. It really does just depend on the scenario that you've set up in your tank. And I will leave you with this thought. Imagine the tanks. Now, I've never set up one of these tanks. I'm familiar with like the Wallstad method and stuff, and there's ways to set these planted tanks up where you start by layering in all these different mineral layers, and then you put clay in, and you put the laterite in, and you cap it off with soil, and then you put sand on top of that. Imagine doing all that. Imagine setting up this intricate layer of different elements and trace minerals and nutrients and all that, and after you've done all that, getting in there with a gravel vac and scrunching around and digging all in there. Like, who would do that? Why would you do that? Nobody's going to do that. So again, just think about what your scenario is. Think about how your tank is set up. Do you have an inch of gravel in the bottom? Then go for it. Get in there and get all that grunge out of there as much as you can. But if you're trying to get some plants established and you've got a little bit, deeper, thicker, remember that. Don't get in there and just start jamming that gravel vac around in there. Not only are you going to disturb any sort of nitrification or denitrification that might be going on in there, you've got the physical roots of the plant. And remember, just like the blood vessels in our body, it's the teeny, 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 tiny ones you can't even really see that are the ones that are doing most of the work. At least the exchange work, not necessarily the travel work, but the exchange work happens at the very, very tiniest little, tips. Same thing's going on with the roots of your plants. So if you're in there scrunching around with the gravel vac and all that, grinding around, imagine there's fine little roots and stuff in gravel that's being scrunched around. You're doing a lot of damage to the root system on those plants. So if you're trying to establish a planted tank, ease off on the gravel vacuuming. Do a very light, gentle, just try to lift. Think about it as literally like vacuuming your carpet. You don't literally grind your carpet up. You vac the stuff off of it. And that's what you need to do when you're trying to establish a planted tank or whatever. So again, I could go on and on and on with the various scenarios or whatever, but the simple answer is that there's no one, you should always do it or you should never do it type response. And I will actually leave you with this final thought, because I wound up not actually doing a water change on that tank. The whole problem and discussion with that tank was that I was starting to get a little bit of an ammonia buildup because I had disrupted the nitrogen cycle by scrunching that gravel around like that. And I wound up not doing a water change on that tank because I checked the pH, and the pH was right where I expected it to be, and therefore I did not need to do a water change because the ammonia was not going to harm the fish at the pH where it was. So my next video is going to be all about that and about ammonia blockers and how ammonia blockers work, or at least my understanding of how ammonia blockers work, and pH levels and all that kind of stuff. So look forward to that. Make sure you subscribe. You don't want to miss that or anything else I've got coming up. You never know what it's going to be with me. And then don't forget, of course, this one here is my 125 gallon New World tank. So thanks for watching. I'll see you real soon in the next one.